No, it's okay. Say what? You need to move the podium up a little bit?
How is it? I got it. You know, I can just move it forward if you need to. Let's just do that. How's that? They get it?
Yeah, we can't see it.
I think this must have been
How about now?
I see it like right here on you.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, really, you're gonna have to come all the way up. So like in between those two.
How's that? All right, let's go a little bit further. Guys, sorry we have a technical problem. How's that?
Hold on, it's delayed, so give us a second.
Apologize.
It's to you next.
Is that good?
No, it's to you next.
Oh, wait, no.
Oh, wait, hold on, it's still moving.
They have to record all these meetings and they broadcast them on the internet for Sunshine.
Can you push up a little bit more?
Yeah,
Probably
and
even with those tables.
somebody's adjusted the cameras, so the podium, when I was back there, you were seeing basically that much down from the podium. Sir? You know, I hadn't gotten paid for anything yet. So
That's okay. Okay.
is that good?
Yeah, your head's, the top of your head's.
Well, I can go.
Well, that's good, right? As long as you're seeing him.
Yeah.
How's that?
It's,
Yeah, but I may back up. I mean, let me get a cushion.
no, you're good. No, the camera finally moved.
Okay.
So you got tons of headroom now, so you're good.
All right.
Okay. All right, so let me, okay, you're good? All right.
If anybody needs to say anything.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
Let me just do a little introduction.
Yep.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Lisa, we're good to go? Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started this evening. I'm Jay Tusa. I'm the Executive Director of Walton County TDC. Thank you for coming this evening. We really appreciate it. I just want to give you a little background on the parking proposal that you'll see this evening, and we'll talk through it, and then we'll take some questions later on in the program. The company Structure Parking Solutions, and this is Greg Darden, by the way, and I'll reintroduce him in just a second so the camera can see him. But Structure Parking Solutions had submitted a unsolicited proposal under Florida's P3 law back this past spring. And the board accepted that proposal and in response put out its own RFQ. And out of that, two firms had submitted proposals, and ultimately Structure Parking Solutions was selected by the Board of County Commissioners. And so that's kind of what brings us fast forward a couple of months, and that's where we are now. Structure Parking Solutions has been holding workshops, meeting with people, putting together a plan that they will present to the Board of County Commissioners on December 12th. So with that said, a couple of little things here. If you do want to ask some questions, we ask that you just come up and speak into the microphone. If you talk from back there, we won't be able to hear you on the system. So please come up and just talk into the microphone. And this is kind of loose, so Greg will go through the presentation, and then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. So feel free to ask any questions you like. All right, Greg? Thanks. And again, this is Greg Darden with Structure Parking Solutions.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. All right, so if a question comes up, you're welcome to ask it during the presentation. It's a small group, and I don't think we have a process here. Ultimately, we want to get your input, and that's what we're after here today. So with that said and done, Jay gave a quick introduction. This slide's a little bit repetitive of what Jay just went over. I don't read slides. You've got the booklets in front of you. Everybody can see the screen. But to add a little bit more color and flavor to what Jay said as far as how we got started here, our company actually develops and manages parking systems throughout the eastern U.S. We commonly form teams that go after these projects to make improvements to not just parking, but transportation and mobility. You'll hear me use the word mobility a lot tonight. Mobility is a better term because, we're not just about parking, we're about providing improvements to your transportation and mobility system. Mobility terms is kind of a all-inclusive term that describes ways that people get from point A to point B, whether it's a sidewalk, whether it's a shuttle, whether it's a private car or whatnot. So we're not just focused on parking, we're focused on ways to improve the transportation and mobility system for the southern part of the county. Again, we formed a team, and our team has been formed for almost 2 years now. We've been watching this system as it's matured, and we did come and approach the TDC about 14 months ago or so. The reason we approached the TDC was because we felt that the system improvements needed to be confined to the south end of the county, and the TDC is one of the groups that has some purview of the south end of the county. When we did provide some information to the TDC for review, it was not, again, about parking, it was about improvements of the overall system. Since we were selected after the RFQ process, we've invested a tremendous amount of time, resources, and money into collecting information, gathering due diligence, and creating what we commonly are referring to as a mobility master plan. That master plan has not been made public yet, but we're going to go over some key points of what we think are important improvements associated to this master plan. We also have prioritized a portion of the master plan as, quote, low-lying fruit, or things that we're recommending need to be addressed first and foremost. And this presentation really addresses that low-lying fruit and the items that we think need to be focused on first with approval from the BCC. So as related to our master plan, again, it's kind of divided into two parts. One part is addressing what we are calling the low-lying fruit. Those items are primarily geared at securing and meeting pent-up demand needs that exist today with the mobility and transportation system, and then laying a basis for the current improvements to be leveraged and develop into long-term plans and improvements in the future. Ultimately, after these initial items are addressed, if we're allowed to address those, then our goal is to transition more into a park and ride program for the southern end of the county. The reason for that is because it doesn't matter how much parking you build and provide, or how wide you make your roads and how many lanes you make them. In our opinion, that's not a sustainable or smart way of developing a transportation system that could have as much stress on it as this one may have 10, 15, 20 years out. So we'd like to see and are recommending that the long-term plan be shifting more towards park and ride as much as possible. At the same time, we want to promote alternate forms of transportation, whether it's bike share, ride share programs. Uber and Lyft have some great programs now. We think those technologies and those types of transportation systems are going to continue to gain market share in the future. We want to also make sure that whatever we do today is sustainable, but also meets the needs and doesn't become obsolete as we march on in time. So lastly, we want to make sure that we use technologies to try to make improvements to the mobility system as opposed to spending money and building things. So I'm hitting some of the high points. You've got a full list in front of you, but to break it down, our long-range master plan is divided into two sectors. One is taking care of initial pent-up demand needs, and then two, building a basis and shifting more towards alternate transportation and park and ride systems in the future. So the first portion of the master plan that we're recommending be considered for approval is predicated, again, on securing some quintessential properties that we think would be beneficial to the long-term sustainability and needs for the parking and transportation system for the south end of the county. The county's in an interesting position right now where there are still properties that are still available, and we think it's important that the county consider acting on these property options before they are taken up by private endeavor and developments, into condominiums or other things in the future. Many coastal cities have not taken advantage of that, and they find themselves in difficult positions now where they just don't have the available land to build out to provide access, if you will, to public uses like beach areas. One of the things that we think is really, really important, and as we've had and I skipped that, but just real quickly, we've had countless stakeholder meetings, and we've tried to create and provide this message to as many people who are willing to listen. But as we've heard back from people, one of the long-term plan or goals of our plan have been to provide long-term access to the citizens of the county to the beaches, and that's really one of the quintessential milestones of our development model. So again, back to the initial development opportunities, you see 6 different circles that are indicated on basically a map of the southern end of the county. I'm going to take each of these sites individually, but remember that as we look at these sites, the 4 points at the top of the slide are very important. Our primary goals were to protect and enhance the citizens' public beach accessibility. We want to make sure that we assist employees as well as citizens with mobility concerns. We want to collect properties to provide immediate relief and long-term options, and we want to start a program that's adaptable with minimum chance of obsolescence. So the first site that as part of this initial offering of items is, if you recognize that location, that's at the west edge of Scenic 98. At the very bottom of the screen, I can get my pointer going, I'll point out some things here. At the very bottom of the screen, this is Pompano Joe's, and then there's the public beach access parking lot here. One of the things I'll hit upon real quickly that's relative to all the slides you're about to see, we've done a boots on the ground assessment of all the parking spaces, not from aerial photography, but actually putting people on the ground and counting parking spaces that are afforded to the county today. And roughly speaking, there's a little over 1,200 parking spaces that are physically owned and controlled by the county. Those spaces include the spaces that the TDC is currently investing money in developing right-of-way spaces in certain areas of the county. But you've got a little over 1,200 parking spaces afforded for public use that are owned by the county throughout Scenic 98 and 30A. One of the things that we want to do at the public beach access points are look at each of these current parking facilities and make recommendations for tweaking these areas. Some of these recommendations include taking away a few of the parking spaces and increasing more bike parking. We believe that there is a little bit of a shortage of bike parking in certain locations, and by creating more areas for bike to park at these areas, these beach access points, we hope that it will spur more use of bike traffic as opposed to vehicular traffic. We like to make sure that each of these public beach access points have sufficient areas for loading and unloading, where a car can pull off and load or rather unload people going to the beach and their goods and supplies, and then reverse the action. By having sufficient load and unload areas, then that will help spur remote parking and hopefully cut down a little bit of traffic around these beach access points. Another thing that we want to look at, and we're not condoning this activity, it's not our place to say what I'm about to talk about is illegal or not, but the fact remains that there are golf carts that exist in a large portion of the Scenic 98 and 30A system. Again, it's not our place to determine whether they're legal or not. The bottom line is that they do exist, and right now, in many locations, these golf carts are parking in full-size vehicular parking spaces. So in the areas along the beach access points where we see a high propensity of golf cart use, we'd like to engage in some simple restriping exercises to provide more golf cart parking and fewer car parking spaces. Again, that's just a proper use of property. So these are some areas that we want to look at each of these parking sites I'm about to show you, plus the existing sites that we're not discussing right now. Lastly, as part of our, that's a common comment here, that's part of our series of recommendations for the county to consider, is we'd also like to work with planning, the planning department, to specifically target some code changes or make suggestions for code changes as related to transportation. Whether those changes have to do with the ability for recognition of off-site parking or whatnot, but we want to look at some potential code changes. So back to this particular site, within this yellow area, we've targeted a piece of property that we're trying to get control of right now, and if successful, this area could provide about 125 new parking spaces for the general public as related to this public beach access point. Continuing moving east, we're still on Scenic 98, and many of you will recognize this structure that I'm highlighting as Amalfi Coast. There's a public beach access point here, and again, within the yellow circle, we have a piece of property identified that we're trying to work an opportunity on with the current landowner, and if successful, that parking lot could provide about 180 public parking spaces to this regional beach access point. Continuing to move east, we're now on 30A, and you may recognize this general area as the Fort Panic public beach access point. The TDC has recently also just secured this piece of property, which is a secondary beach access point for this area. We have a smaller piece of property that's outside the coastal dune lake that's pictured here, but if we're able to control that piece of property, we believe we could provide about 100 or so new parking spaces, public parking spaces to this regional access. Continuing to move east, we're still on 30A, and this is 393. If anybody recognizes the 393, this development in this area here is Gulf Place. This is the amphitheater at Gulf Place. New restaurant just recently opened up here, and Edward Lane public beach access point is right here. We currently have an option on this piece of property here, and this is the one site that we are considering bringing a proposal back at some point in time to the County Commission for consideration for a regional garage, a small regional garage that would provide public parking and beach access here. Continuing to move east, we're now at the 283 intersection of 30A. Grayton Beach is down in this area here. We recognize Grayton Beach as a highly utilized citizen county, if you will, county citizen public beach access point. Very limited, very few parking spaces in this area for this beach access point. The county and TDC teamed together and secured this piece of property here. It's about a 7-acre site a little over a year ago. That property is currently just a surface parking lot, and we're considering improvements to that parking lot that could provide upwards of about 180 public parking spaces in this area. The only way that this parking lot would ever be utilized and found useful is if we also implement a north-south seasonal shuttle, and we hope that we're successful at getting that action created, because this is the beginning of the transition into park and ride, and we hope that this becomes the test for us for our first year of operation, using a seasonal park and ride to provide beach accessibility and parking here. Seaside used this area last year and a little bit the following year as a test bed for employee parking, employee parking. We'd also like to continue that operation, and if successful, we'd like to see an employee shuttle that's running east back into the watercolor Seaside, and not just for Seaside use, but for all employees of the next section we're about to get to. Continuing east, now you're into the watercolor and Seaside area, and we have an option on this piece of property here, and we're still trying to figure out the moving pieces of how that property could come into play to serve as citizen parking and public parking for that region. The property was available, and we put it under an option just to secure it until such time we could figure out exactly what we could do with it. So at the end of the day, as I told you earlier, the county has a little over 1,200 parking spaces within its control. If, and this is a tremendous if, but if everything I just showed you was approved, which it has not been yet, And if it did come to fruition, you're looking at adding about 900 spaces to the system, public spaces. So that's just the data side of this conversation. As you think about that, I'll give you a couple of points to consider. The county has a little over 60,000, as I understand, full-time citizens, homesteading citizens. You've got a little over 12,000 second and third homes or condominiums in the county, on the southern side of the county, and you had nearly 4 million visitors this year, hugely successful. Out of that, you've got about 1,200 or so parking spaces currently servicing all those needs. So that's why we're suggesting that the first step of the master plan is to take care of some pent-up demand needs and to provide a platform for growth for parking and other transportation needs as they occur on the south side of the county, but then start to transition more into park and ride. As related to the park and ride, the next steps looking forward, we'd like to start looking for properties around 98 that we could secure that would become the next series of development opportunities, and that's where we develop parking and then create the shuttles to bring people into the south side of the county. So what is the ask right now? We're gearing up to meet with the Board of County Commissioners and basically ask for two things. We're basically going to be asking them for recognition of our master plan and the concepts behind our master plan. Secondly, we're going to be asking for permission to come back to the Board of Commissioners in subsequent meetings, basically with a series of contracts. Those contracts would include the development of a limited shuttle employees, as we basically defined a moment ago, development of a wayfinding phone-based application that would assist the citizens and the visitors of the county, both identifying shuttles and also identifying parking and how to control and use the shuttle and parking systems. And then thirdly, and probably most importantly, our recommendations include the development and implementation of a managed parking system. So the parking system in South Walton County right now is unmanaged. It's a free-for-all. And without getting into specific details at this stage in the conversation, I'd be glad to talk about it later on, but it's kind of the Wild West. And people park and they stay there all day, and you have no idea who's parking and what their use is and what their business is, if you will. So we're highly suggesting that the county consider and go to a managed parking program. Now, how do you pay for these improvements? And what we're suggesting is that it's partially a user fee base. And the user fee side of the parking management system, the suggestions that we're proposing right now for fees of the parking system itself, the first 30 minutes would be free. If you can get in and get your to-go order, your pizza or whatnot, and get out in 30 minutes, it's a free parking experience. First hour is $2. Each hour thereafter is $1.50, and then a $15 daily max for people who are staying all day at the beach or whatnot. As far as the citizens of the county, we through all the various the many meetings we've had, we've heard this consistently, that we need to have a program that's cognizant and respectful of the citizens that physically homestead in the county. And what we've done in other regions of the country, actually beachfront type regions, is we've created a citizen pass. That citizen pass is an annual pass that citizens who homestead in that county can purchase. It does not guarantee the citizen parking or accessibility to parking. No one's guaranteed accessibility to parking today, but it does guarantee that if parking is available to that citizen, then that parking experience would be free. So that's one remedy that we've suggested. Again, none of this has been approved at the county commission level, but it's one of the items that we're suggesting as a means to help mitigate and improve the parking experience for the citizens of the county. So I went quick. You're not here. I'm not here to hear myself talk. I'm here to get your views and opinions. So at this point in time, I'll be glad to catch and readdress any of the slides we went through, but want to hear your thoughts and your comments at this point. Anybody? Yes, sir. Oh, you were shaking your head. I'm sorry. You were like you were shaking like yes. I want to say something.
Go back to number 2 on your list, the Amalfi.
Yes, sir.
Parking area. You say you're in negotiations there. What exactly?
Well, we're not in a negotiation. there was a piece of property that we had hoped to purchase, and without giving out specifics, the property has been dedicated to a not-for-profit use, and we're working with the not-for-profit right now to try to come up with some kind of equitable means that we can share the site. And again, because of being cognizant of the property owner, I don't want to give out any more information than that, but nothing is etched in stone, and we're just beginning to start conversations right now. Be glad to address that in more detail with you if you want me to. Did that answer your question? I'm big on answering questions, so.
I think it confirms what I.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
The
She.
next slide,
Yes, ma'am.
I missed that. Where did you say that the Hilltop Drive area is located? I know we have one area that we've already acquired, but you said there was another one that was in the works. Where is that located?
At the Hilltop, this slide right here. Well, we looked at one initial property, and again, out of respect to the landowners, we don't want to give out any names in a public meeting, but we looked at one piece of property, and between the cost of the property and the restrictions on the property, it just didn't make financial sense. The yield, it's off the board. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But we do have another property we're looking at in the general area that, and if we're successful, we think we can bring some meaningful parking to the public. Yes, sir.
Back to the Amalfi property.
Yes, sir.
Are you free to tell us anything about specifically what you would do on the parking along the street?
There is already some discussion about improvements to the on-street parking there, and I'm going to ask Brian, would you mind addressing that?
Yeah, just to add on that before he gets into it, I'm a long-time resident in that area, and about 12 or 14 years ago, there was a very large comprehensive plan that was laid out for Scenic 98.
Mm-hmm.
And then when times got tough, it was tabled.
Right.
And the area west of us, by Whale's Tail, Majestic Sun, Surfside, was sort of the start of that comprehensive plan.
Mm-hmm.
And we were hoping that there would be some consideration to extending that plan as it developed in that area to the east of that.
All right, so let me make sure I understand what you're suggesting. Are you suggesting that we should look at being able to expand parking capabilities around the Whale's Tail area?
Not necessarily expand it,
Right.
but continue the comprehensive plan that was started from a standpoint of the landscaping,
Right.
and the way the cars, the paver locations, and just the general appearance of the.
Right. Okay. So I'll say a few words, but I want to get Brian up here. Brian manages a lot of this for the TDC, and Brian, you can give your credentials and whatnot. But the county, well, there was a study called the AVCON study, and that may be the one that you're referencing. It sounds like it is, and basically it's not. It's one before the AVCON. Okay. But essentially, the AVCON study identified areas for right-of-way improvements, and the county, and through the TDC, has already been addressing and those right-of-way improvements for parking and landscaping and whatnot. Again, I want to catch the basis of your question. Brian, you want to expand a little bit more on that topic?
Sure, yeah. So the Whale's Tail parking is part of that comprehensive plan. I'm sorry, my name is Brian Kellenberger. I'm the Director of Beach Operations. Primary job is keeping the beach clean and the beach codes enforced. And I also handle most of the capital improvement projects for the TDC funds. We're close to Public Works on one of the other projects as well. So that portion was done down there, and it was part of a comprehensive plan. Some more sidewalks or boardwalks were built a little further west of there. Coming east, as you encounter the townhomes and such that are on the south side of the road, it makes it very hard to do right-of-way parking when you start considering the driveway cuts, close proximity the buildings are to the edge of the road. North side lends itself a little better to that. The property that we purchased on the south side of the road from your condominium complex, the engineer has been given the notice to proceed, design and permitting. Their first efforts will be to survey the property As you know, we bought the house to the west. Our intention there is to tear that house down, and that will be where the restroom pavilion sits. So anyway, the engineer's direction is to offer up a couple of conceptual parking plans that would best utilize that right-of-way area. And so he'll come back with obviously some parallel parking, as well as some head-in parking. It may include a small island at the edge of the road to keep people from backing straight out into the road. It may not. He's looking at the dune system that's there, what was put in artificially and what is part of natural dune formation on the beach. And so anyway, we give them notice to proceed. We have a meeting with some of the people in your condominium complex, Kay Minshew, apparently the spokesperson.
She's president of the homeowners.
Okay. So we have a meeting with them on the 14th to the 15th.
Yeah, so it's got changed.
Right. And then from there, we'll take that input. We'll come back with probably 3 different conceptual plans for a public workshop. Take some more input and then get some more direction from BCC as to which way we need to proceed with design development. As far as continuing on down the road with that right-of-way parking, that would primarily be a public works project, not necessarily a TDC funded project. We possibly could share in some of that funding if it could be identified as a proper expenditure tourist tax, bed tax money. But right now, it's not on the public works capital improvement projects list. So they have about a 5-year list, maybe a 5 or 10-year list. 10 years really far, purely conceptual. 5 years identified needs of infrastructure improvement.
And so safety is a key part of that.
By all means, safety is a key part of whatever parking
And
we do.
a couple of serious accidents right there. Even, in fact, there was one time where you had a crossing signal system and it got taken out.
Mhm.
That was after people got hit in cars.
All right. Our new standard on pedestrian crosswalks is push button and the standard flashing light on the sign. So it's not flashing all the time. Person comes up, wants to press the button, light starts to flash, and then gives opportunity for cars to see people there.
Has a date been set for that public workshop?
It has not been set. More than likely be middle of January.
So it's-
Like I say, the
it's a while.
BCC asked us to meet with an off the coast group to receive some initial input. So that's our first meeting.
How will it be advertised, Brian, for their,
We'll advertise it on our usual venues, which would be website, newspaper of record. We'll push it out through social media. And of course, I've asked Kay to send me all the email names of people that are in your group that want to be notified. So we'll create we have created a group in our database, and we push out information like that, it'll come straight into your email inbox.
they mentioned landscaping as the TDC/county created a standard for improvements that you're kind of adhering to as you move forward with these right-of-way improvements?
If we do parallel right-of-way parking, we like to put it what I call the door shaper strip,
Mm-hmm.
which is a 4-foot area where you can open your driver's side door. We do native planting that hopefully typically will establish itself and have reduced irrigation needs. Concrete pavers for the surface, concrete sidewalks, and then mostly low ground cover. We like to put in stuff that's just big enough to not park over,
Mm-hmm.
but you can still see it.
I knew the answer. I wanted y'all asked about landscaping. I think what the county and the TDC are doing is just really, they've established a standard, and they're doing that now from this point forward with right-of-way improvements. It's creating a theme. It really looks nice. So Did that take care of your questions collectively? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Debbie Hurd, I'm chairman of the Coastal Dewey Advisory.
Hey, Debbie.
And I noticed that some of your areas do fall into protection. Some of the places you're speaking of.
One in specific mind?
395 and 38 is the property that I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
It's
so-
partially in the zone.
Yeah, so let's talk about that one real quick. Let's just address them one at a time. So the particular site at 395, you're right. Don't hold me to specifics, but about 2/3 of the property falls in a wetland in a coastal area. Only approximately a third of it is actually highlands and developable. Very prematurely. Don't write this down, but our concept is to take the property and subdivide it, and then take the wetlands portion and donate it back to the county if the county has interest in it. Set up a conservation district, a park, or whatnot. So.
Well, and I'm assuming we're talking about where the Cedar Park was moved into.
There's no plans for anybody to move into
They
it.
were going to, they had.
They'd considered it, yes, ma'am.
Considered it, okay.
Right.
Because it really is just a small portion. It's in the
Very
state.
small, right, very small.
But so my question is, what will your surface area be?
We honestly don't know just yet. That's the one site that we really haven't figured out.
Well, any of the sites, and even not in the projection zone, this is a concern.
Mhm.
If you use the surface, asphalt or
Right.
anything like that, you've got the runoff.
Right.
And the runoff from what has leaked through the cars and whatever.
Could not agree more. Right,
into the environment.
right.
So that is going to be a huge concern
Mhm.
for people, especially in the protection zone, which like what I was going to say was when Seagull Market was moving there,
Mhm.
that dumpster was in the protection. zone.
Right.
So they agreed to some things to
Mhm.
leave it. They moved it, and then they agreed to clean it a certain way. So those are things that will come up and be an issue.
Fully agree. So let's, first off, I'd love to get a card from you, because what's the process here is that, again, I outlined the asks that we have for the BCC coming up here shortly. And those asks are not for consideration nor approval of the improvements of the sites we just showed you. What we would be doing with these sites, just like Brian's doing with the right-of-way improvements, as a specific site is identified, we have to do a whole lot of due diligence and planning. And each of these sites would go through the same vetting process that is traditional of any development, which we would want to bring in groups like you, show you what our thoughts are, get your input, and make sure that the sites are not negatively impacting the environment or anything else. So we're not asking for approval of any of these sites, and we're just showing you kind of our vision here.
Okay. And how will the money be collected for the parking?
It depends on who the operator of the system is, and I don't want to be presumptuous. The next step, if the county approves our vision and whatnot, then we'll start. The intent is we'd start negotiations with the county to determine exactly the management style, the equipment, who's operating it. So it's just honestly, I can't answer that question just yet. I can answer it from the point of view that whoever is operating the system would be collecting the quote revenue from the system. If that operation exercise is done by a third-party private endeavor, then there are safeguards that allow. This would probably largely be a cashless system. There's going to be very little cash. So,
Like maybe it's Savannah.
right. So the bottom line, though, is the answer to your question is that whoever is chosen as the operator for this system will be the one that's collecting the revenues, and then those are being accounted for accordingly.
Okay. The other thing is you addressed homesteaders.
Mm-hmm.
Homesteaders and second homeowners are different.
That's correct.
So you're saying the $35 would be for homesteaders.
That's correct.
Second homeowners would be just anybody else.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. Yeah. The concept here, and I'm not making excuses, but the second and third homeowners are probably people who already have accessibility to the beach anyway, more than likely. Yeah. I mean, there has to be, first off, it's not my policy. I mean, we're creating a model. It's up to the county to approve it or not. And there's, yeah. I understand.
The other thing is you didn't address the area where really the most congestion and the most problem is in the middle of the road.
Correct. So,
And there is land available, so
let's talk. Enlighten me.
Okay, all right. There's some, when there's construction going on, in some of these plans,
Right.
that's one of the major problems in Seagrove right now, is a construction project that's going on. When they did that plan, they didn't make them make a parking plan for the workers.
Right.
So they're everywhere.
So,
They were in the right of way, they were in the visibility triangle for several different intersections.
Right.
Lots of problems.
right.
Some of that's been corrected. This has only been a single people. We don't have the interior people there yet. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of vehicles a day trying to drop off equipment.
Right.
Or park or whatever.
Okay.
And then what it led to was, when they parked in the right of way, they parked in the right of way. Then when they pulled out, a beach fellow would park in that space, making that, and of course, it shouldn't have been parked there to begin with. So it led to a huge, huge
Right.
issue. So that is something the county does need to address, is when these type projects are being, planned, that there is a plan in place for that parking.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So all I have potential purview over is county right away. That's it. What you're speaking of is a development issue, in my opinion, and I'd suggest that you bring that up with planning or someone else, because historically in most areas, when you have a major development that's coming out of the ground or being developed, you have to be able to mitigate whether it's traffic or construction debris or whatever the case may be. It's when you start, there's a slippery slope when you start asking a county and its citizens to figure out how to mitigate a private development, the problems of a private development.
I think what I'm getting to is when you get into this next phase
Mhm.
of the 98 parking,
Mm-hmm.
that that be thought, that this development that's constantly going on,
Mm-hmm.
that be thought about
Mhm.
in how those people could
Right.
lease certain spaces, or there be, parking ride or something, which
Right.
should have been what was.
Agreed. So there are a number of communities along Scenic 98 and 38. I'm not going to name any of them, but you can figure out which one of the communities are. A lot of those communities are beginning to address their transportation needs internally, and we're actually discussing those needs with them. So if there's someone at Seacrest that you'd like for me to talk to, Seagrove, sorry, I said Seacrest. I'd love to speak with them. And, okay, perfect. Let's,
But yeah, there's a lot of issues going on with Seagrove. I mean,
right.
Right in that own down from the 395 and 30.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
that's.
I'm glad that we've, for a lot of reasons, we've made the association. So let's have a further conversations then. It's good. Thank you.
So you talk about the parking rides.
Yes, sir.
What's the rate for the workers?
Well, we have not set any rates yet. That's part of the next step. We're just trying to get the first step is to get the county commission to adopt the principles, if you will. The intention is that first off, let's talk principles. If a shuttle is to be utilized, it needs to be convenient, it needs to be on time, it needs to be clean. You need to give someone a competitive reason to want to get on a shuttle as opposed to stay in their private vehicle. Their private vehicle is the easiest and least resistant path to get from A to B. So with all that said and done, one of the components of a shuttle system is also cost. And if that cost is perceived to be expensive by the users of that shuttle, then that gives them one reason not to want to ride the shuttle. With that said and done, it's going to take a collective effort between us and not necessarily the TDC, but us, the county, and the employers of the area to help pay for and offset the cost of that shuttle to those employees. There's a difference between employer and employees. So part of this is a collective educational effort. I'm not going to call out any businesses, but if you've got a business along 30A, more than likely, unless you're fortunate enough to have a lot of property, you have very, very little parking associated to your business, if any. And if you have 4 or 5 employees or 20 employees, whatever the case may be, that need to find their way to work, it's counterintuitive to you as a business owner to have to use your few parking spaces to park employees. And it's just common sense that if you can put those employees somewhere else that's reasonably close and open up your parking spaces for business, your business receipts should go up. Long story short, we're going to have to work with the employers to create a parking cost that makes sense for them to help offset their employees riding that shuttle. And I hope I answered you. I don't have rates. We don't have them yet. We've got to get past the point of the county commissioning allowing us to begin development of those programs, and then we'll step back and work with the employers where those shuttles are opening up to help develop fee structures that make sense for everybody. But I hope I tried to answer your question. The bottom line is that it needs to be free or very, very cheap to the employees themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not additional costs. Those additional costs are going to have to be made up somewhere.
Well, the other side of that sword is those employees
Mhm.
on their off days,
Mhm.
which are rarely the weekends. when
Right.
it's busy. Also, want to use the parking because they're citizens, but I won't say most of them.
Right.
But probably most of them are not homesteaders.
Right.
They are renting places or living 2 or 3 people in a
Mhm.
place, sharing, Brian's garage or something, but,
Mm-hmm.
so, what is?
Right.
That's not a homestead.
That's not homestead. Right. That's not homestead. Right.
A lot of people rent that don't, that's the same, I mean, if they have a driver's license, they rent, they're full-time residents.
Right.
Registered to vote.
Well,
That's not a homestead.
the
There's a technical, legal.
Well, I understand that.
Right.
That's not, that wouldn't be fair.
So-
But that's not what the answer is.
we
I know that.
Right.
That was why I asked the question too, because there's a lot of people who don't actually own but rent, but are full-time residents registered to vote.
Right.
Own businesses, have driver's license, this is their home.
Right. So
That needs to be addressed a little
a
differently.
suggestion is a suggestion. At the end of the day, it's up to the county commission to decide who's covered and who's not covered. That's beyond the scope of my
A
responsibility.
lot of flack from those homeowners that don't, homeowners that are second and third homeowners, get a lot of flack from them about them not being able to. If they get a beach pass for Great Beach, then they ought to be able to pass for more.
Well, that's a lottery situation. That's,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, that's a little bit different situation. So, yeah.
So that, they get a lot of flack from that, but.
The management system has got to happen, and the management system and the technology, without getting into the weeds here, the technology that's available to manage parking transportation systems has just expanded exponentially in the past decade. It's just amazing what you can do. We can track vehicles, whether it's a rental vehicle or whether it's a fleet vehicle by its tag. There's just a lot you can do on the management side. Again, we recognize that there's a lot of difficulties with this system. It's a linear system. It's not a closed system. Most of the parking is not in parking lots or in vertical garages where you've got singular points of access. This is mostly right-of-way parking. So it's going to have to be a heavily enforced, heavily managed system to make it work and to keep people from gaming it. We recognize that. A lot of challenges there. A lot of challenges. But you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, because the other thing is those second or third homeowners,
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the percentage of the property taxes that they pay,
Mhm.
the county's gonna pay, looking at your funding models.
Right.
County's gonna pay for it, GDC's gonna pay for it.
Right.
People are gonna pay for it, there's gonna be a mixture.
Right.
Those property taxes,
Mhm.
they actually pay more property taxes.
Right.
than
So,
the homesteaders.
so
They're the ones that use their places to collect the bed tax. That's gonna be that revenue stream. So I'm just, and I understand the homestead,
no, and I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. Appreciate the conversation.
But they're not the majority of the voters
Mhm.
probably in this county.
Okay.
So,
So what's the solution? What's your solution then?
so if you're a property owner, I don't go to the beach lotteries. If you're a
Well,
property
that need to
owner
be a lottery, but you need to be a property
No,
owner
yeah.
or have a driver's license.
or work
Okay.
in a business, and, if we're having to go to Alabama, which we are, some businesses don't have to
Mhm.
go to Alabama to get workers,
Right.
Okay? They're not gonna drive an hour and then drive around and wait 30 minutes on, because they just missed the last bus or shuttle or whatever and be late to work. I mean, there's gotta be a better system.
Then a parking ride?
Well, no, parking ride's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it works in certain circumstances.
Mhm.
It works for Seaside. They've proven that, you know, all our people, we just run our own little shuttle back and forth all day long. That's good. The problem we've always had is we're a very linear
Mm-hmm.
destination.
Right.
And so you get the parking ride, coming from the Funiac Springs or anywhere, down to this area right here, not a problem. The problem is getting them over 26 miles
Mm-hmm.
of distribution to drop off to people.
Right.
Every people there.
Right. So.
Like, other than the big outlet malls.
Right. So, I mean, this system, because of its, you're recognizing this system is going to operate like a major city like Atlanta. And I'm not comparing it to Atlanta. I'm saying it's going to have to operate like an Atlanta type system. And the meaning is that you're going to have localized hubs, that are bringing people down 331. That's beyond the scope and purview of what our capabilities are under our request. But we're already working with groups who are wanting to do that, and we sequenize our shuttles. Without getting too far in the weeds, you're going to have regional type shuttles that are bringing people from long distances to Funiac and whatnot, Freeport. They're going to come into 98 theoretically, and there'll be park and ride hubs along 98. From that point, you'll either get on the blue line, the red line, the yellow line, the green line, whatever, depending on where you want to go. Exactly. Correct. Long term, I think that, and this is way long out, but I think that the county needs to start looking long term at an east-west corridor shuttle that runs the length of 98. Is that going to be one shuttle? Probably not. It's going to probably a series of 3 shuttles. And when the east side meets the center, then they line up and you jump off one and get on the next. It's all about timing. The same thing for 30A and Scenic 98. I mean, at some point in time, hopefully, 10, 15 years out, we've got right-of-way established, and we're looking at shuttles along those areas.
When you think about somebody in Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to a $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 job. These people are going to hourly,
Mhm.
seasonal jobs.
Right.
You're asking a lot of them to do that.
Mhm.
To go to a job, they're going to get paid $8, $10,
Mm-hmm.
$12, So it's a little different. It's a lot of effort on their part
I agree. Let me give you a case study. So we were hired by the VA hospital in Charleston, South Carolina about 3 years ago. If you've ever been to Charleston, the VA hospital, it's a very small hospital and it's completely landlocked. They have got no room for growth. We actually developed a garage for them on some property that they had, but it still wasn't enough parking because of height limitations in historic Charleston. So they said, we still need more parking. And the bottom line, they identified they needed about 600 parking spaces. So we identified a piece of property that was about 1.5 miles from the hospital. We developed a parking lot and developed a shuttle system that runs 5 days a week throughout the day, and the lot was designated for employees. 7 months after the lot was developed, we went back and polled the employees, and we actually told them that the lot was going to close to see what the reaction was, and that they were going to have to start parking back at the hospital somehow, fighting for parking spaces. They came out of the woodwork, upset, absolutely just irate. Today, we are in the process of signing a contract to purchase more property to expand that surface parking lot to start including patient parking, because they just don't like the issues of having to drive into the peninsula of Charleston, deal with the traffic. They had much rather park remotely and then be able to ride a bus in and know when that bus is hitting and when it's coming back. So the point is that I agree with everything you're saying. This is a hard situation, and it's going to have some angst. People are going to have some concerns. But if it's handled appropriately and you give it a chance to mature, you can't please everybody, and it won't fit everybody. The construction workers that have to bring tools in, this system doesn't work for them. It doesn't. You can't put tools on the back of a shuttle. But if we can capture 20, 30, 40% of the employee base, it's going to have a significant positive impact on the roads. We can't really do much with 30A, guys. I mean, there's only so much right of way, and one of the really cool things about 38 and Scenic 98 is its quaintness. You know, do you really want to put a 4-lane down 38? I don't want to see that. You know, well, whether you can or you can't, do you really want to see that? So let's come up with the best solutions. There's going to be problems to them. We're going to have to work together and fight through them. We don't have all the answers yet, mainly because we haven't reached a point where we can really start negotiating with the county and people like you to figure out the fine pieces. There's going to be other steps to this process. We'll get to that. We're just showing you the basis for our concepts. And again, I'm not being argumentative. Your comments are important and they're really good. They're good.
Our third parking study.
This is not a study. This is an action. Right.
Right. It's not
We're,
an action yet.
yeah, you're good. We're root for us, okay? Because we're hoping it's an action.
So, we were here for AdCom, we were here for Genesis, and
Right.
participated in all those. And so, and there were some great ideas in both those.
Right.
But they, sometimes the economy doesn't agree, or the width of the right of way doesn't agree, or.
Right. Right. Well, again, thank you for your comments. We're not ending here. We'll keep talking, but they're really important, and we do take note to them, and they're helpful. They're very, very helpful, and we hope that you continue providing input to us. Anybody? Yes, sir.
I'd like to go back to some statistics that you stated before.
Right.
So you have either currently or under plan 1,200 parking spaces along both of these routes, right?
A little over 1,200, yes, sir.
Okay, so then you ticked off about 3 or 4 categories, the number of people using.
Well, I didn't mean to infer that those people were using them.
I wanted you to go back and restate that because I didn't capture it.
So it's our information, and Brian or Jay, please speak up, or anybody speak up if this is incorrect, but our understanding and information shows that there's a little over 60,000 true homesteading citizens within the county. There's a little over 12,000 second, third home condominiums, whatever you may call it, whether they're in the rental program or not, on the southern end of the county. Is that a pretty close number?
We have 12,000 units on the rental market.
Thank you. 12,000 on the rental market. Yeah.
Units. I mean, it could be a hotel room, it could be a 5-bedroom home.
Right. And then,
Just the unit, then that's not counting how many people are parking.
Correct.
correct. This is not, right, this is just physical dwellings, if you will. And then, per the article in the paper, the TDC and the county were announcing that there were just under, I think, 4 million visitors last year to the county. And I don't know how that information was gathered. Jay, you may want to comment on that.
Yeah.
So we got 60,000 citizen types, 12,000 units that are probably second or third, but not all of them are. I mean, like our place, only 75% of people rent out, there's 20%.
Sure.
And 4 million turf.
Mm-hmm.
So really, when all the slides we've seen, we've seen citizens and things, but isn't this really being driven by tourists wanting access to the beaches? Because people that stay in our county, they have parking spaces. I mean, is that what we're doing?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, we're trying to protect and make sure that the citizens and to some extent the visitors to the county have accessibility to the beach parking areas. Yes, I mean, I'm not trying to point out any one group, but there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of growth in Defuniak and Freeport right now. There's a lot of planned growth there, and these people are going to be citizens of the county, and an asset of the county are the beaches. And the TDC and the county have done a great job of continuing to provide beach access points. But how are we going to get people to those access points?
I mean, has there been any data, maybe you know the data, about who's actually using the parking spaces now?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, it's visitors and locals. I mean, I
Well-
live in New Allen, and I drive to the beach, and I park at the parking lot, and I go to the beach. I mean,
Yeah, and I mean,
I don't live on the beach. I live near the beach, so I have to either walk or drive.
And there's a lot of rental property. that's
I was about to
not-
say,
It's not on the beach.
yeah, right. I was about to say that, right.
And there's people that live, like you, like me, I live across the street, I have
Right.
a parking space and I can walk.
Right.
Like the other night, we went to take photographs, we have equipment,
Mm-hmm.
we went up to the park at Rainbow Road.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's reason to do that, there's lots of reason to do that.
Sure, right.
So,
I mean, that's why you can't, I used the phrase a lot, I hadn't used it tonight, but you can't fire one bullet. To have a meaningful and positive impact, you can't just address parking, you can't just address shuttle, you can't just address this or that. You've got to address everything simultaneously to have a real meaningful impact here.
I will tell you that every listing in Freeport, or Miniac, anywhere in northern part of the county says, just minutes from our beautiful beaches.
Sure.
Listing.
Sure,
So that, you know, they're advertising that, there's gotta be a place where those people park, and Freeport is being developed and it's growing.
Right.
Those people wanna be able to get in their car,
Right.
across the bridge, and park at the beach.
you know, so again, as related to the sites that we showed you, the potential development sites, you know, that's just taking care of some initial immediate demand needs. The long,
We're behind
yeah,
on it.
right, I mean, take advantage of some properties while you got them left.
I can't even tell you what the parking that was created at Eastern Lake, at the house, all that, those few places that were created,
Mhm.
the difference that has made.
Sure.
Because of the way people were parking before it was lit.
Right.
Less cars could get there, but now.
And that's really important. You hit the nail on the head. It's formalized parking and it's managed parking, and that's the key to any program. in my
Right.
opinion.
Right,
Right, and it's made such a difference there. And in other places too, where people were parking in the right of way, if you create the
Mhm.
management, they park in the right of way, but they park where they're supposed to,
Right.
the way they're supposed to.
but again, and I'm big on this, I mean, we can't just keep widening roads, adding lanes, and building parking. We've got to come up with a sustainable approach, and the only sustainable approach here is to offer an alternative to parking, which is going to inevitably be the rideshare programs, and that gives people an option. Because this county's going to keep growing. This is what I've heard that this is the 4th or 5th largest growing county or fastest growing county in the United States. I don't know if that's documented yet, but I've heard it's been a very quick.
Well, the problem is convincing people to ride that shuttle, because they don't ride the shuttle now.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
right,
it's getting them to do it.
right.
Them to do it because they want to drive their big car, and they want to take all their junk, and they want to unload it, and they want to be right there, and, you
Well,
know,
the junk is part of the problem that we found.
yeah.
Right.
So just like you said, the worker's not gonna take his tools and put them on.
They can't. That's not
They're
reasonable.
gonna take their boogie boards and their chairs and their umbrellas and their 8x8 or whatever size tent we're gonna have next year.
Right,
And put it on the
right,
shelf.
right,
Just throw that out there.
right.
The,
Pull that knife out of your back.
9x8.5. So,
Right.
you know, there's gotta be a capacity, I mean,
Well,
different people look at different things like Disney World type, shuttles.
Right. well, at some point in time, 20 years down the road, codes may change and needs may change. We don't know. Right now, we want to give people alternatives. And if a parking ride is an alternative, and if it's just a man and his wife or whatever the case may be in a beach towel, and they don't want to get in the traffic, it gives them an alternative. Well, they're there. They're there. They're there.
What changes behavior is pain.
Well,
So what we have to do, and it's the right thing, we've been talking about it, is you formalize parking, put up boundaries to keep people where they can't park in informal areas.
Mhm.
And then what will make them ride the shuttle
mhm,
is, of course, if the shuttle is consistent
mhm,
and frequent,
mhm.
but also if it becomes too much of a pain to bypass the park and ride parking lot in hopes that I'm going to find my parking spot
Right,
down there,
right,
they will pattern themselves to say, man, I'm not gonna go out around
Right.
waiting for 30 minutes trying to find that space for Edouard Lane. I'm gonna park here, and I'm gonna get on the shuttle. And the beachgoer, I think, will, once again, pain. Dad will just have to say to the family, no, we're not taking 4 tents.
Right. Right.
We're taking what you can carry today, and that's it. Construction workers, there's already land development code language that instructs them on what they are supposed to do.
They're not enforcing it, and that's the problem, not enforcing it. And then when the development plan, and I know this is off your subject, but the development plan was made for that specific project. As with most, they have a parking plan there. There was no parking plan and they passed it without it. And then here they're in trouble and the citizens are the ones with the problem, you know? And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for county. It's a liability. It's a liability.
Well, I'm saying, so, but that's just following the rules that are already in place.
Right.
And so that's the key to
It's
that.
enforcing the rules of our place.
Agreed.
Well,
Yeah.
better to do it at the permitting level. Don't try to do it on the street.
Well,
Yeah,
it's not even
happening,
just the
yeah.
permitting level. You know, we have never enforced the right of way, or, you know, we've got millions of signs.
That's, okay.
you know, of which none of them, not none of them, half of them are not enforceable, and the sheriff won't enforce it.
Well,
Okay, and the code hasn't enforced it. So you can build all formalized, and I agree, formalized plan, but until somebody starts writing tickets or starts towing vehicles,
right. So
'cause I'm
Without
only down
getting-
here for a week.
without getting too deep, I mentioned code changes, and that's one of the things we've looked at, and it's our belief that there may not be sufficient codes to allow the sheriff and deputies to actually ticket in certain situations. That's part of what we want to look at as well. Verify and then and suggest changes.
Well, like in Savannah, they, what do we call them here, the posse?
Yeah.
The posse. Okay, they have something similar to the posse in Savannah, and
Mhm.
they can write parking tickets.
Right.
Where, I don't know about our posse.
So, yeah,
They,
the,
you know, I've never heard of
In
it.
Florida, actually, you can do that.
well, right,
City of Destin,
right.
We got people in our code enforcement.
So,
Just use a digital app parking
Well,
system
me-
that automatically charge fees.
right, so let me hit all of you at one time. So the recommendation that we'll have as related to the management system is that whoever the manager of the system is, whether it's us or whether the county decides to manage it, they wouldn't just be managing the parking, they would also be managing the right-of-way at the same time. And yes, there are current codes and laws within the United States that allow a third-party operator to ticket. And with the current technologies, you know, that third-party operator can find you regardless of whether you're in a rental vehicle or a fleet vehicle or whatever. So, yeah, we're getting a little bit more in the weeds, but part of our complete series of recommendations is to look at codes, adopt codes as necessary to allow the management of not just the right-of-way, but also the parking system, and then whoever that operator is would be performing and patrolling those areas. Yes, absolutely.
Well, if people knew that was happening, but they know it's not happening. And, you know, I'll give you an example. At 395 and 30A, okay, they're doing construction, and they put up all the barriers,
Mm-hmm.
and they just drive over the barriers and park over.
Right,
Just park. And
Right.
then you come back the next day, they're all laying on the ground.
right.
You know, and that's just what they do. And that's locals doing that.
And it's just, we've,
So, you know,
it's, the system has got to be managed. It's got to be strictly managed. That's just it. Bottom line. Yeah, we're on the same page completely with this. Regardless of who the manager is, it's got to be managed
it's gotta be
strictly.
managed by- that's the key word is managed.
It's got to be managed. Yep, absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Okay. I'm going to hang around, so get your information and whatnot, but I'll hang around, and thank you very much for coming. One last thing as we follow up, we hope to be at the County Commission on December 12th, is that correct? 12th. And we'd love to continue to get your feedback and suggestions, and if you hear anything different than what we're talking about tonight in the public, you know, have them call me or please correct them, because we're telling you exactly what our hopes and aspirations are. Jay?
And just real quick, I just want to close it out just by, Greg mentioned feedback, and feedback's very important for us. So if you have a moment, please go to southwaltonparking.com and complete a survey that we have online. We've actually had almost 400 surveys completed, so I'm happy to see people may not be attending the workshops, but at least they're giving us their feedback through the survey. So if you have a moment, please take a look at that. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We'll, talk about, different scenarios and all that. Bring back
Good luck.